Hi, everyone. It's Casey, and I'm hopping on here tonight to talk to you about my latest blog post. This one has been a long time coming. I feel like I've jotted down notes about this blog post and kind of just kept little sticky notes and pieced things together until finally I bit the bullet and wrote all my ideas down in one spot. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this tonight. The blog post title is Reading Instructional Practices to Use During Intervention in Small Group to help struggling readers in middle school. So that's a mouthful. But essentially, I'm thinking of the language arts teachers that a lot of times get tasked with, like, whether you call it win time or if your school has some sort of universal intervention period where students are getting extra help with reading and math. A lot of times, language arts teachers are given this half an hour a couple times a week where they get a group of struggling readers and they're asked to try to help bring their scores up, bring their reading scores up. And, what do you do? What approach do you take? And that is my intention, is to just give some ideas of some instructional practices that will be helpful to you as you try that out. So I'm going to just be scrolling through the blog post here and highlighting different things as we go through. So a lot of times when we get tasked with this, we rely on computer. And while there are some really great computer programs out there that help with reading deficits, I think the power of a human and the power of a teacher for students that are in middle school and struggling with reading is really important. So while that might be an element, I would really recommend doing as much teacher-based instruction as possible with these students. Also, middle school students are kind of like the middle child when it comes to reading intervention. There's a lot of things in place for elementary students, a lot of great ideas out there. And then what happens is middle school students then are kind of given these materials that might seem babyish to them, not developmentally appropriate, reading stories that have themes that are more appropriate for third or fourth graders. So that's a common downfall as well. And then the last common downfall that I often see is using that same instructional practice again and again and again, day after day. And students and teachers just get really burned out from that. So also, I want to point out before I share these instructional strategies that two very important things when you're starting a reading intervention group with middle school students. First one is community, taking the time to get to know them, to make them trust you and feel safe in their group of students that they're with, and just kind of have that connection with each other. And then the second thing is just that variety that I mentioned above, where you're using a variety of instructional practices across a given week. Additionally, having a strong core instruction is important as well. You're not going to fix students if you are having a core instruction where they're spending a majority of their time that's not solid. Additionally, if you're pulling students out of core reading instruction in order to give a reading intervention, that's not going to fill what you need to fill either. It should be core plus the reading intervention. Strong components that I would see in middle school reading intervention or reading instruction would just be, then this would be in the core. Would you be seeing a daily oral reading fluency where there's like a 2 to 3 minute oral reading fluency that kids are doing? You would see an interactive read aloud, a reading mini lesson focused on an aspect of reading. There would be some elements of small group or one-on-one instruction and conferring. There would be a variety of formative and summative assessment across a reading unit, and there would also be focus and time given for student independent reading. All right, so let's dig in to the first instructional practice, and that is partner repeated reading. So I actually have a document that when I'm doing partner repeated reading with my reading intervention students, who I see 4 times a week for about 30 to 35 minutes each time, I am using this protocol that I've kind of tweaked and worked on until I've figured out what works best for me and my middle school students. So I'm just sharing with you what that looks like. I'll click over to it so you can see what it looks like. So you can use about 2 to 3 paragraphs from a text. And this text could be from a nonfiction text. It could be from a novel. It could be from a poem or song lyrics. I really like to use Scholastic magazines when I do mine. I just find that works really well. And then once you find the 2 to 3 paragraphs, I would photocopy it off, and you'll see why as I keep going through it. Start by just talking to students about what it means to be a fluent reader. Fluent readers, it's not just about reading fast. It's about, how you phrase things. It's about pausing at punctuation correctly. You can see all the different things listed there. And then next, you distribute the copies of the passage, and you start by identifying 4 to 5 tricky words that you think students are going to have a hard time pronouncing within the passage. You're going to have students either highlight those or underline those. And then the next thing you'll do is you'll have students point to each of those tricky words you identified and say them 5 times each. And you'll just go through that to start with. Next, you're going to have the students follow along with their eyes as you read the passage aloud to them. After that, you are going to have the students read the passage aloud with you chorally. And then from there, you will break students into partners and they will read the passage aloud to each other. So, like partner A will read to partner B, then they'll switch, and then they'll actually do that again. So, they'll each read it twice. I've gotten ideas for feedback students can give each other. So, teaching each other how to give each other feedback on their reading and their fluency is a really great thing to do. And then if you have time at the end, you can get back together, split partners into partner A and partner B, and alternate reading the passage one more time by paragraph. This actually takes like 15 to 20 minutes to do. This is something that I'd recommend doing probably about once a week, once to twice a week in your intervention, depending on how much time you have. I usually do this once a week. So that's the first instructional practice. The second instructional practice is using the Frayer vocabulary model. If you've heard of this, it's something that you've probably seen a lot of different versions of, but here it is. You've got where you have you pick out the vocabulary word and you have students cite the actual sentence from the text in that first box there, and using proper text citation, copying the sentence down exactly as it appears. Then whatever that vocabulary word is, you're writing it in the middle, and you're having students give an inferred definition or words that they think mean the same as that vocabulary word based on how it's used in the sentence. Next, you'll actually look it up with students and you'll write down the reference definition in student-friendly terms. And then finally, you will have students write their own sentence using that word to show that they are able to transfer the meaning into their own writing. Once again, this is something that I would recommend doing with 1 or 2 words once or twice a week, but it's a great way to build that vocabulary. Next up, my third instructional practice recommendation is Reader's Theater. So Reader's Theater has been a major hit with my students this year. I actually kind of thought they would hate it at first, but when we did a few and they got really into it, they started like fighting for parts, who was going to be the biggest, who was going to have the biggest speaking role, which I found really ironic because these are students that probably wouldn't be fighting each other to read aloud during class on a normal basis, but great fluency practice, obviously, great practice of how to show the emotions of how people are speaking, but also really great for vocabulary and comprehension as well. The fourth instructional practice is the text-based response. So there should be writing involved in a reading intervention. I'm a very firm believer in that. If you're looking especially at reading comprehension, writing is such a way that you can really see a student's brain. You can see their thinking and how it's laid out in writing. And sometimes students end up in reading intervention because they aren't able to really express their thinking in relation to their reading. So I think teaching that text-based response and teaching them a structure for how they can answer questions based on reading is a skill that they're going to apply to their language arts class, but also all their content area classes as well. So I like to use an acronym called T. The T stands for topic sentence, E for evidence and explanation, and A for analysis. You've maybe heard different strategies such as ICE or RACE, which are very similar purpose. And then the fifth instructional practice I have is a novel read aloud. And so this is something that is part of the whole class core instruction that I do. I always use a read aloud to model with for the mini lesson. Well, I think the read aloud looks different in reading intervention. You're probably choosing texts that you can get through in about 2 to 3 weeks at the most, so a little bit shorter of novels. But the goal for the novel instruction would be that you are teaching students how to really attack a book. How do you orient yourself at the beginning of the book? How do you track those plot events across the text? What kind of thinking are you doing as you're reading? And when you're doing this in a reading intervention group, I do recommend students all having a copy of the book so they can follow along with you as you're reading aloud. They're mapping the words with their eyes to what they're hearing you pronounce the words as, so that's a really great thing as well. But you're kind of taking it and you're breaking it down more so than they would get when they're more focused on the listening comprehension part when you're doing this in core instruction. I think a lot of times we make the mistake in middle school reading intervention where we stick with really short text, which works great. But then we're expecting students to transfer that back to those longer novels. So taking some time to incorporate a novel into the reading intervention for middle school is an important thing to do. Some 3 novels that I've used this year in my middle school reading intervention that have worked really well. First one is Forget Me Not by Ellie Terry. Second one, Red Kayak by Priscilla Cummings. And third, Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. My 6th and final instructional practice is teaching students about how words work and how different parts of words fit together, looking specifically at spelling patterns, Greek and Latin roots. Resources that I have found helpful in accomplishing this. This is a book called Mindful of Words by Kathy Gansky. And she has a book that is a little bit more prominent called Word Journeys. And this one, though, she wrote for specifically grades 4 through 8, which I really like because it's focused toward middle school. There are word sorts in here, different principles about words to teach students that are very explicit and give students those rules that they need that they don't have ingrained in their memory at this point. The second resource I have here are called Daily Word Ladders. And these, you can see a picture of what they look like on the cover. I love to use these as warm-ups once or twice a week. It's a great spelling practice. They're fun. Students love them, and also good vocabulary. So the 2 that I would recommend for middle school, Daily Word Ladders for grades 4 through 6. That's the highest that it goes. And then the other one is Daily Word Ladders for content areas grades 4+. So both of those would work really great for middle school students. Last, I just want to talk about how I would set up my week with reading intervention. Just gave a lot of instructional practices, but I didn't really say how they would fit together. So the first thing there is I would set up like a Monday through Thursday schedule or whatever days you meet with students and decide what instructional practices you are going to use on which day. So this is just a sample of how I set mine up. So I have weeks 1 through 4. So like 4 weeks in a row, I would use this schedule where Monday we would read a nonfiction article. We would take 1 or 2 words out of that article and use that Frayer model. That's what we do on Monday. Tuesday, we come back, we take 2 to 3 paragraphs from that nonfiction article, and we do the partner repeated reading, and then we'd grab a word sort from Kathy Gansky's book that I mentioned above. Wednesday, we'd come back, we'd start out with a word ladder, and then we'd do a text-based response based on that nonfiction article. Thursday, we would do a reader's theater and possibly do another Frayer model with 1 or 2 vocab words from the reader's theater. And we would just repeat that process for a couple weeks. And then we come back after those 4 weeks and I would throw in a novel study in there and take 2 weeks for a novel study and then come back around and repeat weeks 1 through 4. So students are getting a nice variety, but yet they're having some consistent instructional practices focused on that fluency piece, the vocabulary piece, the comprehension piece. If you are interested in learning more, I am going to put the link to this blog post in the comments right now. I also just want to let you know that in the blog post, there is a link where you can download that partner repeated reading teacher protocol sheet and then also the feedback for partners. You can download those for free. There's a link right in that blog post where you can do that. Also, a free template of that Frayer model that you can print out and use is available in that download as well. If you have any questions or thoughts related to reading intervention at the middle school level, please drop them below. I'd love to hear from you. I thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to continued conversations about this in the future. Thank you.